One of the biggest and best guilds in the history of WoW's raiding scene has recently disbanded. Big Dumb Golden Guardians, aka BDGG, aka Big Dumb Guild, has decided to call it quits. Now, they've cited a slew of logistical and financial issues as to why that we're all going to go into. But first, let's take a look at who BDGG is and why their disbandment is so important to the WoW raiding scene. Let's hear from their own words who they are. BDG has been around since 2013 and contains a group of professionals by day and gaming enthusiasts by night. We have nurses, construction workers, singers, artists, dentists, lawyers, students, teachers, and engineers in our ranks. While raiding is our main focus, we also provide content for players in the community through our educational video guides and Twitch streams. We view this as well as hosting guild-sponsored events as a way to give back to the community. We foster an environment that strives for a high level of achievement and competition whilst maintaining a lighthearted environment. BDGG utilizes our expertise in time management, research, networking, and efficiency as demonstrated by our competitive world ranks, despite rating only a fraction of the hours of our competition. BDGG was created to maximize performance while still maintaining real-life responsibility. Now, for maintaining IRL responsibilities, they did really well because they managed to achieve not only a top 5 ranking in the US, but they also ranked in the top 10 guilds in the entire world pretty quickly after they were created. Let's go ahead, let's take a look at some of their crowning achievements. US 2nd, World 4th, Mythic Razageth. US 2nd, World 10th, Mythic Jailer. US 2nd, World 4th, Mythic Sylvanas. US 2nd, World 9th, Mythic Sire. That's a pretty impressive resume, especially from being created in 2013. Look at when they started. Their very first clear, US Mythic Imperator 157. From there, they cut it down to 61, 30, 23, 13, and then Mythic Gul'dan. Not only did they maintain and improve that top spot, but then they started competing on the world stage, and it only went up from there. And again, for maintaining IRL responsibilities, dude, that's really fucking good. But aside from their achievements in the game, they also did some incredible things outside of the game, like hosting an event where they raised over $11,000 for RAIN. RAIN is the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization. They also co-hosted an event with Echo, who is another very, very high-ranking guild, arguably the best guild in the world, where they raised over $13,000 for girls who code. Now, aside from the good that they've done within the community at large, they were also highly respected amongst their peers. You can see here, when they announced their disbandment, the overwhelming outpour of support from the very same people that they competed against. Raider.io, Method coming in with the GGs, Echo honoring them, Towley down there, Jack. I mean, again, the outcry just over their announcement on Twitter amongst their peers was pretty incredible. So what happened? Everything seemed to be going well for BDGG. They were progressing higher and higher with each rank. They were doing all these wonderful things for the community at large. Where did it all go wrong? Well, let's hear about what happened from the GM and one of the co-founders of the guild themselves. As some of you may have noticed, we haven't really done anything since our kill 2 months ago. Some of this time has been for a break, some for considering which direction to go into the future, and some of it has just been me dragging my feet. After putting a little over 9 years of my life into running this guild, I'm announcing the disbanding of BDG as a hardcore / race to world first guild. A couple of bigger reasons for this that all kind of work together. Number 1, a decline in leadership, both in quality and quantity. This has mostly been a recent problem, but I definitely don't feel the same level of desire that I did back in Castle or Sanctum days when I was excited to do some work. It's not fair to say raiding became an obligation for me, but the passion and desire was gone. I could have done better. Couple that with having to change out basically my entire officer team twice in the past year, business partners stepping away, and high amounts of stress and anxiety that I've been feeling since Castle, I'm left with little motivation to continue this other than inertia. It doesn't feel right for me to give my guys anything short of the best. Number 2, losing core players each tier either to retirement/burnout or taking offers from the top 3, as they should. Regardless of the quality of their replacements, the process slowed us down and created a sense of perpetual rebuild that gave the guild something of an identity crisis. Anyone who has been there for even a year knows what I mean, and it sucks. This just isn't something most core raiders on a roster want to do again for the 3rd time. And then number 3, a loss of sponsorship has a lot to do with the above points as well. This mostly ties into the first point of us not doing enough internally to secure our future, but pretty obviously the scene requires money that doesn't exist here anymore. Makes it harder for anyone to justify the time commitment outside of extreme passion, which frankly speaking, most people lose in about 2 years. As for what happened this tier, I think we always knew a rebuild tier was going to be rough. I thought Aberrus was going to be a rough rebuilding tier with all of the stuff we endured post-Vault. Key players retiring, new officers, handful of people leaving a month before the tier, but we somehow pulled a world 4th out of that. It seemed like it was feasible to match that performance or at least get close. So that's what the expectation got set. After we realized we were not playing up to the standard, early Smolder on, that kind of set us on a path that spiraled down into poor play and attitudes we had to fight through primarily, rather than just fighting the mechanics. I'm proud we stuck it out through all that though, and finished the tier, as I think we would have felt significantly worse to end halfway through, which looked like a real possibility at one point. I do want to express my sincerest gratitude for everyone who has been through this guild, all 295 of you. If I've learned anything in the past 2 months of not really playing WoW, it's the people that I miss the most, more so than the game. Ultimately, you are all what made this special. Feel free to DM me if you want to talk about the old days, high points, or low points. Anything from the US 200 days in early WoD, or one of our insane world firsts, like Vectus, Desolate Host, or Fated Sire. Fun games of League of Legends or Tabletop, or any of the Race to World firsts that we took part in, or just to catch up. I'd be happy to talk to all of you, and I wish you great success in life. Now, the rest of the post goes on to kind of congratulate, or not congratulate, but to thank specific people, offers condolences, and then kind of go on to say what he's getting up to, which TLDR, he's not really sure. He's playing it by ear. So that is what went down in his own words. It's pretty evident to me just reading through this statement that this wasn't something that he came to lightly, that this was something that weighed on him heavily, and something that he dreaded for what seems to be a long time. But he boiled it down to 3 main issues, which I kind of just want to highlight. Number 1, a decline in leadership. I have led much lower ranking guilds before. I have been everything from a GM to a raid leader, and even on the low end of this spectrum, when you are in charge of logistics and organizing a raid and leading them to success, there is an additional level of work and expectation that takes place outside of the raid. Believe it or not, corralling all of the raiders together and getting them to work in a congruent and synergistic way is not only a lot of time, but it's also very emotionally taxing. Getting different personalities to work together, dealing with off-the-cuff guild drama as it happens, right? Understanding certain policies or crafting certain rules for certain situations. All of that is time, effort, and energy that is expended before you even zone in. And depending on the severity, which I'm sure when you're one of the top 10 guilds in the world, that's going to weigh heavily on you. And that's going to make it feel like a job and really burn you out. Number 2, trouble retaining the top players. Again, this is something that I experienced in my limited time with Mythic raiding, and no one is at fault here. But let me just give you a personal anecdote. So when I joined a pretty competitive guild, one of the things that we would see is a constant revolving door of players. We did have a thorough application process, a big vetting process, a trial period, all the things you would expect from a competitive guild. But what ended up hurting us the most is a better opportunity for some of the leaders. I remember it was Warlords of Draenor. We were doing Mythic Hellfire Citadel, and we were pretty competitive on the server. We had gotten to Manaroth, and then our raid leader, one of the head dudes, got an offer, and he didn't immediately take it. He let it sit for a bit, but as we started struggling to get Manaroth down on the Mythic level, that offer became a little bit more tempting for him. He decided to take it and join a guild that was about 3 rankings higher than us. And the very next raid, the attendance was cut in half and the guild disbanded. After he took that opportunity, we never raided again. When you hang at the highest level of Mythic rating, it's competitive, it's cutthroat. So there's a constant revolving door even on the lower end of Mythic rating, much less at the higher end, right? Imagine if you're a raider of BDGG or any other top 5 or top 10 world guild, and you're pumping. You're doing big dick days, you're taking weeks off of work, you're prepping for the raid, you're giving it everything you have, but you're not seeing a lot of financial gain from that, right? Because that's how a lot of these guilds are. There's not a lot of money in the scene, and we'll talk about the sponsorship point later, but there's not a lot of money in the scene. It's not like people are rostered and they've got a set salary. So a lot of the times they're doing it just because they love the game. So put yourself in that position. Now, imagine that you're doing incredible world first top parsing things, and all of a sudden you get a little contract thrown your way. You get a little money, or the promise of money slid your way from one of the big boys. And they're like, hey, you know all this effort you're expending? We see that. We see your talent. Come play for us. Not only will you rank up and play with the best of the best, but you also will get paid to do so. And perhaps, if you're good enough, you could pivot that into a streaming career, right? A lot of the people in Echo end up not only hanging around World First, but also pivoting and being some sort of a content creator on the side. Look at Genji, for example, or Limit Max, right? Very successful careers outside of just the race to World First. And then finally, for the third point, a loss in sponsorship. This kind of goes back to what I just said. When you're playing at a high level, you're doing it for the love of the game. You're doing it for the passion. You're putting in big hours and you're not seeing the money from it. Eventually, that passion's going to burn out because it's not sustainable. At some point, playing 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're going to need to see some return on that time. You're going to need to make some sort of living wage just because of the absolutely insane amount of effort that competing on the Race to World First stage requires. Like the BDGG GM was saying, most people burn out in 2 tiers. And I think that's why. You're putting in a lot of time, you're making a lot of sacrifices to your personal life outside of the game, and it's tough to justify sustaining that lifestyle for a long period of time if you're not able to get some sort of financial stability from it. And a loss in sponsorship in a scene that's already kind of top heavy when it comes to sponsorship dollars, that hurts really, really bad. But what does this actually mean for the raiding scene as a whole? What does one of the top guilds of the world disbanding mean for, say, the average Mythic raider? Well, I think it could be a sign of long-term Mythic raiding problems that are starting to slowly come to a head and starting to see more of a public light. I think we're getting to the point now where, due to the publicity of the Race to World First, we're starting to see a lot of the fundamental problems that have been felt throughout the Mythic community for a hot minute. We're starting to see a lot of those same issues shine through on the highest top-ranking guilds as well. And they're starting to be publicized. But don't take my word for it personally. Why don't we look at a couple of different perspectives? Now, this is from what I would consider an average Mythic raider to be. As a longtime fan and an avid player of World of Warcraft, I wanted to take a moment to share my thoughts on the current state of Mythic raiding and the time-consuming demands that it places on players. I understand the importance of a challenge and progression in the game, but I believe that the restrictions in Mythic raiding have reached a point where it's simply not enjoyable for many of us. First and foremost, the requirement to constantly gear up just to stay competitive in Mythic raiding has become a monumental task. The endless grind for better gear through dungeons, quests, and other activities is a huge time sink. While I understand the importance of being well prepared for challenging content, the game should also respect players' time and not force them into such a demanding cycle. This time commitment for Mythic raiding is another issue that I believe needs to be addressed. Expecting players to invest 20 hours or more each week in order to clear the raid is simply unrealistic for a large portion of the player base. Many of us have jobs, families, and other responsibilities outside of WoW that make it impossible to dedicate that much time to raiding. Moreover, the steep learning curve and demanding mechanics of Mythic raiding can lead to burnout and frustration, especially for casual players who may not have the resources or time to keep up with hardcore raiders. This in turn leads to a toxic environment where only the most dedicated and well-geared players can hope to succeed, pushing casual players further away from the in-game content. What I propose is a rebalancing of the Mythic rating system that takes into account the needs and time constraints of a wider range of players. This could involve implementing a more flexible difficulty scaling system or reducing the time and the gear requirements for entry-level Mythic raids, and by making these changes, Blizzard would make in-game content more accessible and enjoyable for all players, without sacrificing the challenge that makes WoW so compelling. In conclusion, I believe that the current restrictions on Mythic rating have become a barrier to entry for many players, and are making it increasingly difficult for casual and hardcore players alike to enjoy the game. It's my hope that Blizzard will take these concerns into account and consider making adjustments to Mythic rating that respects the time and effort of all players, regardless of their playstyle. Now, do I necessarily agree with everything that was said in this post? No. I think some content shouldn't be for casual players. I think some content should be really, really hard and probably should only be clearable by the best of the best, the people who are willing to put in the work. But I think it raises an interesting point. One of the key words in this post is frustration. You don't want the players feeling frustrated before they even step foot into the raid. But let's take another look from another POV. This POV is pretty interesting because it's from one of our beloved WoW Community Council members, Mr. Dobie. Now, Dobie has written a PhD thesis on this very topic, and we're not going to examine all of it in depth because, again, Dobie is a little wordsmith here. But I think there are a couple very interesting points that I would like to highlight. I mean, he talks about the pacing and the structure of the raids, farming no longer providing benefits, right? Raid composition becoming incredibly restrictive. We'll start with the intro first, though, and then we'll jump to the part that I really want to highlight for you guys. Hello, all. Just to provide some background on who I am and the perspective that I bring, I'm Dobie, the Guildmaster of Nascent. I've raided at a high level in every tier of WoW outside of Mists of Pandaria. I was there farming Molten Core 52 times the first year it came out, and I'm still here farming Mythic Amir Drasil. Our guild has been raiding at the top 100 level for a few expansions now. We also do it at a very modest 9 hours a week. My goal in writing this post is to provide some insights into some of the problems we now face in WoW as a Mythic raiding guild, and to reflect on the state that it is in. My hope is that this helps paint a clear picture to Blizzard, and ultimately will lead to some improvements. Our guild really loves raiding, but there are quite a few things that we hope can be improved. To preface several of these topics, we may be what many would consider, quote, elite. However, I do believe that if improvements can be made to some of these issues, that raiding as a whole in WoW could ultimately improve. I'll do my best to be concise. Now, I know Dobie tried his hardest, man, but he's popping off. Let me scroll down to one of the points that I felt like was the most important from Dobie's post here. The nature of raid buffs, debuffs, niche utility, and now multiplicative player empowerment, like Augmentation Evoker, has forced guild rosters to shrink over the last few years. This is because we generally have fewer composition changes than we ever had. We're rotating only a few slots. If you consider playtime equity, this means that you're not going to be able to maintain a roster of 26 plus very easily anymore. People will leave because they're seeing less raid time, because we're swapping less people. Our roster is now kept at 24, and with this playtime equity, it's still often unfair. Now, I've got a great point for this one. I felt this personally. I raided in a US 50 guild in Kata. It was the first tier. I was a holy priest. Raided with them would be a bit of an exaggeration, because really, I was a water boy. I sat outside the heroic raid instance portals, fully stocked up with flasks for the main raid team. I was swapped into a couple of fights, because I was a holy priest, which was really popping at the time, and that was it. As a new initiate, it was just hard to get some time, and by extension, hard to get some gear. It took me a couple raids to realize this, which probably admittedly was too long, but it did not feel fun to log in and alt-tab as a water boy. You were expected to be on for the same amount of time, for the same amount of days, as if you were raiding with the main team, but you didn't see any of the action, and you didn't see any of the reward, and you know what happened? I fucking bounced. I didn't take that. Well, I took it for a little bit longer than I should have, pause, but I eventually got out of there, because exactly what this guy's saying. I didn't see a lot of equitable playtime. Having backups for each role is not tenable because of our gear scarcity and, again, playtime equity. This further creates composition volatility. Your druid is out and you don't have MOTW, which can have a significant impact on your raid performance. The net effect is that guilds have smaller rosters than ever before, fewer backups, and are struggling to balance playtime equity. This means guilds have to operate with more risk than ever. If there are expected outs, players quitting, or trials that don't pan out, the guild is significantly more likely to die. Again, I can relate to this just by the story that I was telling you guys earlier. It only took one card to fall for the whole house to come on down back in my competitive guild in Warlords of Draenor. Because of how intense and how difficult it is to find people to fill a roster, it takes one bad apple to ruin the entire bunch. This is then all impacted by shifting balance within the game itself. Reworks tend to lead to overpowered specs that are not tuned enough to go into a new tier, which then mandates we force people to re-roll. This again, not healthy, because our roster has been forced to be so small that we often struggle to adapt because of how rigid we are being forced to operate. And this means that our players who prefer to main one thing are now feeling unnecessary pressure to re-roll. And here is the big takeaway that I wanted to show you guys here. It is more difficult than ever to operate a mythic raiding guild. That's scary. Because I think mythic raiding is one of the most powerful things in WoW. I think to see those people perform at such a high level is such a nice carrot on a stick for a lot of people. It's such a huge bar to look up to. Not only in the game, but think about the viewership for things like the Race the World First. That's exciting. It's cool to see those people pop off like that, and we need a populace to have that level of competition. And so seeing that it's more difficult to operate these types of guilds, and the leadership, the people who are putting in the most work, are struggling more so than ever, that's a sign that we're burning the candle at both ends. Now, am I saying that mythic raiding is all really bad and it needs to be deleted from the game? Absolutely not. I think it's great. Again, I love the challenge. The harder the battle, the sweeter the victory. I think it's one of those things that you really strive to do. And it's cool that there's things in this game that very few people can even scratch the surface of, much less complete. But what I am saying is that for a lot of people, even at the highest level, the juice may not be worth the squeeze anymore. But what do you guys think? Sounds like a bunch of casuals slash S. So I get what you're saying. And I kind of felt that same way too. For me, I feel like it should be hard. I think what they're getting at is not the level of difficulty, it's the level of social frustration that comes from it. So like for me and my friend group, who we clear AOTC relatively easily, and then we kind of burn out of content, because for us, Mythic just isn't sensible. Not because of a difficulty, but because of the social frustrations that come with organizing the same 20 people for a lockout every time. Here's a very specific story. We were clearing Mythic Drazara lore, and we were cruising through it. We got the first 3 down, no problem. We got to the 4th boss. We had our friend, he had to bounce. He had an IRL emergency. We still had about 2 hours left in the raid. We were done. 19 out of 20 people. No one's taking a lockout on the 4th boss to take the easiest 3 for the free low gear. We sat in trade for an hour and spammed before we called it quits. Life just happens. And I think we can still preserve the prestige of mythic difficulty while eliminating the logistical and structural frustrations that come along with the social part of it. You know what I'm saying? Like it feels like the raid is hard enough, and I don't want the difficulty from the raid to feel like it comes from sources that happen outside of it. These 2 statements further the point that Mythic Endgame is not for everyone. Yeah, Blizzard's responsible for some of these changes, but at the same time, it's not for everyone. 100% agree, and I don't think it should be. The alarming thing that I see in those statements is the word frustration. Because with enough frustration in the external factors that are not associated with the game's difficulty, people are going to burn out. It should take time and effort to raid at the highest level. I think there's something to be said if you want to be the best of the best. If you want to raid world top 10, you got to be able to put in the time that other people aren't willing to put in, for better or for worse, regardless of the cost, right? If you want to be the best, you got to outwork the best, right? So I don't think anything really should be, you know, kind of altered there. I mean, especially because people are taking these crazy, crazy loads just to try and get a sliver of advantage. But if you want to be the best of the best and you want to eke out every advantage, that's what you got to do. Great parser thread for sure. I think some of that, again, I'm not concerned about the difficulty stuff that they're saying. The main thing that worries me when I see posts like that is frustration. When you see the word frustration in a game, one of the very next words that follows that is quitting. I'm not saying they should lower the learning curve, the difficulty curve, change the number of people. What I kind of stand on is we should seek to figure out the core reason of a lot of this frustration. And if it's something that doesn't have to do with the raid, maybe we should talk about a solution. If it's because you're frustrated because Timmy is like face tanking some flames and he's dying, tough shit. Boot Timmy, tell him to get good. It is what it is. That's part of mythic raiding. But if you're frustrated because, you know, like IRL stuff is happening and you can't find people to, you can't find the same full 20 because your server is dying and you're waiting for the Hall of Fame to fill up so they can open cross-server raiding on mythic difficulty so you can try to pug people and keep your group going, we could probably look at that and do something to alleviate that frustration, you know? I find that people aren't necessarily frustrated with the number 20 itself, as opposed to the nature of the lockout and the lack of opportunity to replace raiders that aren't able to make either one night or have to step out early. Because what ends up happening, and again, this kind of goes and speaks to the social issues of it, what ends up happening if somebody has to leave is you can't pull with 19 out of 20. There's no doing a mythic boss unless you've already cleared it with 19 out of 20 people. It's maybe the first boss or something, but like if you're progging on one, it's not happening, right? So the decision tree there is you either call it a night, or some big guilds will have a bench they could pull from. A lot of them don't. Or you could maybe go into a trade chat and try to pug somebody. But the pug is going to have to tank their lockout, right, to accept yours. So if you've already down 2 bosses, they're going to come in. They're going to have to sacrifice the 2 bosses for the week on just the opportunity to progress with you. And a lot of pugs aren't really willing to do that. So what ends up happening really is when there's an issue, it just stops. It crumbles, right? And you think about somebody who has taken the game seriously enough to play at the mythic level, they're upset. Their raid night is over. Whether they took off from work, carved time out, told their partner they can't go on a date because they're raiding, whatever the case is, they've already incurred that cost and now it's wasted because someone decided not to show up. And then if that happens enough, sometimes even once, they'll start looking elsewhere, right? They might quit altogether, or they might go to another team, but the cards start to fall. I've ran a guild for years, not a top tier one, just a casual one that steps in and out. The biggest problems are 1, people, drama, and BS. Boom. 2, recruiting, it's hard. Oh my God, yeah. 3, time. By the time you've ran the guild, you're behind on everything. Dude, 4, if you don't kill a boss on the first try, you've lost interest. There's a big rush in mentality in WoW nowadays. Bro, you highlighted perfectly some of the qualms of leading in a hyper-competitive environment where people are constantly revolving door. I dealt with a lot of this personally in Shadowlands. Like when you are trying to fill a roster outside of IRL stuff, because like depending on your friends, I mean, they'll stick around, right? Half of our IRL friend group sometimes would be fucking blasted mid-prog, right? And we were all okay with that because we're buddies, right? We're there for each other. But somebody that I pulled out of trade chat doesn't care. So even if you put all that time into recruiting, and you get everybody in there and you guys have a bad night, they might not log on the next night. You know what I'm saying? It's, if you advertise the full clear and you got, you know, 11 out of 12, they might not be coming back. And then it's just, you're even further behind, even more time devoted to that. I totally get you. I felt the same thing. Running a guild is exhausting. Yeah, it is. There's a whole element to it. Final Fantasy lockouts are weekly and people are easy to replace. Each boss is a separate instance. See, and that's the thing. Those are the dials that I feel like should be changed. It has nothing to do with like how hard the bosses are or what you need to learn or how you gear or the rewards. The structural, technical, like factors that seem just sort of trivial. Yeah. I feel like if someone has to bail and for an IRL issue, you should be able to replace them, right? Like that's not a bad thing. People got a lot of shit going on now. And sometimes people have got to bounce. And I feel like having an entire other group of 19 people punished because of someone's IRL snafus, I mean, dude, it doesn't have to be like that, right? It would be better if it wasn't.